Hey there folks, how you doing today? Welcome back to the channel. Please bear with any background racket that you might hear throughout this production. We are on location where life happens, and sometimes there's stuff going on right out there that interferes with what we're trying to do in here. Also, I will ask you to put up with a noisy fan. I'm not speaking about one of you people, but rather the noise in the background that's blowing my paperwork around, as it is much too humid out here today to get through this without it. Speaking of fans, this will be an episode of Unfiltered fans only content. For those of you that keep track of what we do here on this program, I'm talking about you, Mr. Alphabet Soup Handler. You know that this is something I do periodically for the fans of the channel as a way to say thanks for putting up with my nonsense. I call it Unfiltered because I have a tendency to speak my mind a little more sometimes in this situation than I do on something that I'm trying to make to appeal to the masses. But also, I don't go to quite the trouble to edit this portion of the content that I do for some of the more professional type videos that we put out. You know, if I'm doing it for somebody else, like to represent a product or something, I'll put more effort into it. For this, I'm not going to. Most of you are at peace with that, and the ones that aren't, well, there's that. Okay, I was in the safe earlier today getting something out that I was parting ways with. One of the items that we have featured on this channel before has gone on to bigger and better things. And I have absolutely no regrets about that item leaving the fold. And there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about it later. That one's actually a production that I'm still working on. But I said all that to say this. I got to thinking about, before I parted ways with it, as to whether or not I was going to regret the decision later on. And I've already come to peace with the fact that I'm glad it's gone. And in the event that I ever wanted to build something similar, it would be relatively easy to do. So there's that. Now, with that in mind, I got to thinking about some of the guns, some of the hardware that I've had over the years that for whatever reason I parted ways with, and whether it be that it was instantaneous or a little later on down the road, I regretted getting rid of it. And there were several that were on that list. So I narrowed it down. I've got a top 5 plus an honorable mention, because that's what the kids here on this platform do. So in no particular order, I've got these written down here. I'm going to tell you what it was. I'll put up a picture of it if I have one laying around. Otherwise, I'll put up a generic stock photo. I don't have them anymore, so chances are I don't have pictures of all of these, but I will dig through and see what I can do for you. The first item on my list, a gun that I owned, that I got rid of thinking, I'll replace it, and to this day I regret it. First item on the list was my 1895G Marlin guide gun in 4570. This particular one I purchased circa 2004. I was still living in New Mexico, didn't have my son yet. I lived there long enough after I bought it to hunt with it a couple of times and do a lot of hand loading and practice with it. So it had to have been around 2004. I don't remember when Marlin brought the 1895G out, but it was relatively soon before that. I want to say maybe they'd been out for a couple of years by the time I bought mine. What the 1895G was an 18-inch barreled, straight stocked 4570 with Ballard rifling, as opposed to the Marlin microgroove crap. It was made for quick target acquisition. The one that I had was Magna-ported, and that helped out a lot to take the thump out of it. It was not necessarily a pleasant weapon to shoot, but it was a very effective and very easy to carry weapon. Through trial and error, I figured out that it really liked those Hornady lever evolution rounds that were made for the tube-fed magazines. They had that flex tip on them. I don't remember if it was a 325 or a 340 or something like that grain bullet. Really liked them. It was incredibly accurate out to 100 yards. I had a 3x9 scope on it. Took it on a hog hunt, had a lot of fun with that. That year, I shot a couple of deer with it. I shot a doe in the head with that rifle, and mission accomplished. Really enjoyed it. Had a coworker, a colleague of mine, that kind of had a thing for it, and he had mentioned to me, he says, you ever want to get rid of that, let me know, I will buy it off of you. Well, move forward a little ways. Had a family emergency, some stuff that had happened back home. Needed some quick bucks, and I sold it to that same guy, thinking to myself, I'll just get another one. Well, wasn't too long after that, Marlin sold out to Remington. They started making the Remlins, which were absolutely no good. Kind of glad I never got one of those, but at the same time regretted getting rid of my old JM stamped 4570. Now, thankfully 2 or 3 years ago, Ruger reintroduced the 1895, and if you remember back to the first episode in 2022 that I did, the What's New in 2022, the one where I started working on the Alaskan rowboat rifle, I had put up at the beginning of that one that I wanted to get one of those Rugers. To date, I still haven't done it. They're still holding a premium over MSRP, and I'm just not going to pay it. I'll wait until the market's a little more saturated with them and the cost of groceries has come down a little bit, because they are kind of an expensive item, but I do plan on getting a new one. Alright, moving right along. Next item on the list was my Ruger Super Blackhawk 44 Magnum. It was a 7.5-inch barrel. Bought it secondhand from Tricky Dick's Tularosa Trading Post. Again, around 2002, 2003, somewhere back then. Enjoyed it, had a lot of fun with it. Had an old man taught me how to shoot silhouettes. So I started loading for silhouette shooting and shooting the little clanger plates out at extreme distances with it. Had a lot of fun with that one, and really didn't want to get rid of it, but I was preparing to transition, because that's what kids do these days. I was preparing to transition from life as I knew it in New Mexico into my new career back in 2006, and I sold it to a friend of mine who still has it, and so it went to a good home. But at the time, it was again one of those that I needed the money, and I decided, well, I'll just get me another one sometime. And good Lord, you can't touch one of them things for less than about $700 or $800 now. So maybe eventually I'll get one, but I don't have one yet. All right, another one on this list that is very similar to that was my Ruger old model Vaquero in 45 long Colt. It was color case hardened. Had a set of Elkhorn grips on it, real slick looking pistol. I purchased that when I was 21. I think that was the first handgun that I purchased, and for that reason I really wish I still had it. But I got rid of it because I needed money and figured I'd just replace it somewhere down the line. But shortly thereafter, Ruger got rid of the old model Vaquero and switched to the new model Vaquero, which had the smaller grip, and that was the biggest complaint that a lot of people had about the old model Vaquero, was that the grip frame was too large, which was exactly why I liked it, because I've got big hands. So I'm sure there's still some of them floating around. Those aren't cheap anymore either. Maybe someday I'll get another one of those, but probably not. I don't see myself replacing that anytime soon. On the trend of guns that I bought a long time ago, I had a cousin who was older than me who purchased a single shot New England Firearms Pardner 12 gauge to go on a dove hunt with. And that particular shotgun kicked pretty hard, and he didn't like it because it beat on him too much, and when he came back from his hunt he was complaining about it. And I think at the time I was a young fella, and I offered to buy it from him. I said, well, what do you want for it? And he says, I'll sell it to you for $50. And I bought it, and I played with that thing and had more fun with it over the years. Actually almost put my lights out with it one time because I had a bad ricochet with a slug. Thing came right back by my head. I could hear it whizzing past, and learned a lot of lessons back then. But regardless, it did kick really hard, and it wasn't quite as handy or functional as having like a pump action 12 gauge, which I had one of those shortly after that too. And I forget what it was. Something came up, and I sold it to a guy, I think for the same $50 that I had paid for it. And I always just kind of intended to get another one and never did. Now I do have one. I've got one in 20 gauge sitting in there in my other safe, and it's a lot of fun. But I miss having that 12 gauge just for the nostalgia of it. You know, I played with it so much when I was a kid. All right, moving down the list, I have a Remington 700 BDL in 270 Winchester. A particular rifle. Actually, I had it for a very short amount of time, and I only took it out and shot it once, but it shot really well. Sorry, I had to get something to drink. I was a little choked up. So this particular Remington 700 belonged to a childhood friend of my wife's. He came to me one time, this had to have been 20 years ago, and he told me, he says, hey, I really need a couple $100. Can you loan me the money till the weekend? I told him, well, I really don't have the money to loan you. He said, well, I tell you what, he said, here, I'll let you take my Remington BDL. He said, you can take that as collateral. If I don't pay you back by this weekend, it's yours. And so reluctantly I did it. I gave him the money, which at the time, I mean, I was only making a couple $100 a week back then, you know, maybe $300 a week, maybe. So he was asking a lot, and I had my own obligations, so I really was reluctant to do it, but I did it because he was a longtime friend of the family's. And that rascal, I gave him the money, and he took off on me. He moved from New Mexico, where we were at the time, back to Montana. He used it for gas money to get up there. So he was gone, just took off. And I was so mad because he had said he was going to do something, and then he did something completely different and kind of left me holding the bag. You know, here I was out money and had this nice rifle that I really didn't need. What I needed was gas money and money for groceries. So in my frustration, I told my wife, I said, see if you can get a hold of him through his family or something and find out what he wants to do, because I'm going to have to get rid of this thing. So she never could get a hold of him, but she went and she talked to his mom, and his mom was able to come up with the money, and she bought the rifle back from us. In hindsight, I probably should have kept that rifle. It was a nice rifle, but I digress. At the time, I didn't feel that I needed it. So now that brings us to the last item on our list, the honorable mention, which was my Glock Model 42. For those of you that have been following along for quite some time, you'll know that I got rid of my Glock 42 after I had purchased my Piece 365 because I found myself never carrying it anymore. And I used the proceeds from getting rid of that Glock 42 to purchase the Taurus GX4, which has been so popular here on this channel. So while I can't say that it was a bad move, there have been many times since then that I kind of regret getting rid of that little Glock, especially if I was wearing shorts to the convenience store or something like that. And I probably will replace it with another one at some point in time. So now I'd like to hear from y'all. Is there something that you had in the past that you got rid of that you regret doing so? Leave me a message down here at the bottom in the comments section telling me about the one that got away from you. Until next time, take care. God bless.